are issues they're still trying to figure out themselves, and we are trying to figure out those issues. So we are in the research phase trying to figure out what is the data, what are the safety issues that can be encountered, and we're not talking safety just when you're driving down the highway. We're talking about safety of the vehicle when it's plugged in at night in your garage. I mean, that's another critical mode. You don't want it just causing a collision on the highway. You don't want to burn it down your house at night when you're recharging the car. And we're looking at other issues that what happens after the crash. When you destabilize that cage that the battery is in, have you affected the battery chemistry in such a way that you're going to have, while you're waiting for the tow truck to come pick you up, are you going to have ignition of that battery pack? Or 2 days later, while it's sitting in the at the garage, or while back home in Alabama, people just haul it and put it in the backyard back to where I'm from. So you don't want it catching on fire there either. So so there are a lot of issues here that have got to be analyzed, and I don't know that anybody's got a good handle on a particularly latter issue of the safety of the vehicles after you've been in a crash situation. But across the board, we are interested in the safety strategies that the manufacturers are pursuing. We're gathering the data. When NHTSA's regulatory mode, as you well know, is reactive in that we don't issue regulations to avoid a problem. We identify from the data that there is a problem, and then we issue regulations to prevent that problem from occurring in the future. But we really can't wait when you're dealing with an electric vehicle industry, because you don't want to create a bunch of guinea pigs on the road in America and in other countries to get your data. So I'm not saying we're going to move ahead with regulation, but we are moving ahead with discussions and encouragement. The speech I gave today, we want to make sure everyone is looking at what their safety strategy is, having a very well thought out safety strategy. If they don't have a safety strategy, we want to discourage them from rolling out a car on the highway without figuring out how they're going to maintain that vehicle and make it safe. So we know we can do that today, and we are doing that. And eventually, once we have the data, there will be regulations in this, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. Final question.
Tom Volker from Green Car Reports. There's been a lot of discussion about this notion of separating out the cost of the battery pack and making it a separate lease payment. It's been discussed for a few years now, and I haven't seen it piloted anywhere by a major auto manufacturer. My understanding is that well over half the plugins that are being sold this year are going out on monthly leases. So I assume it would be a wash regardless of whether you write one check or two. The question is this simply a short-term effort to try to break those costs out and separate them until you get to the point where you can reliably establish residuals for the batteries? Or are you envisioning this as a permanent, different way of selling?
So thanks for the question, and I think it's a good one. I think the reason why most of the automotive makers, whether it be Renault or Renault Nissan, the Alliance, or Volt are leasing is because the high cost, initial cost of paying for all this new technology is simply too high, and so they're willing to take a loss on the car by putting it into a framework that the consumer can, let's say, digest. So I think that's why you're seeing a lot of cars on lease, plus some of these cars, they want them to come back in 3 years. They don't want them to be on the road for 10 years. So I think there's a couple of different reasons. Much the same way, for example, Ken Baker sits on my board, was the head of research and development and the program director for the EV1 at GM. And they put, if you remember, in the 90s, they put that car out on a lease and then brought them all back in and ultimately decided to destroy that car and that program. But so I think there's let's say the initial reason why you're seeing leases is because you're still in this sort of test the market mode. And look, I mean, Volvo is doing the same thing here with their test fleet programs as well. And so I think we're still in the age of discovery. So let's separate that discussion from what I'm talking about. And the important part of what I'm talking about is that I believe that the value of the battery goes well beyond the automobile into secondary and third use applications. So what I'm talking about is taking that whole pie of value and only charging the automotive consumer for the part of the value of that battery they're going to use, which is a very, very different discussion. And I started this debate, let's say 2-3 years ago, and we will have a pilot program, but the important party that needs to come to the table here is the utility company. And as you know, there's over 3,000 public utilities in the United States, with each of them responsible to their 50 public utility commissions around that. So this is, let's say, not an easy set of waters to navigate in terms of getting the, let's say, the battery built into the rate base or those sorts of conversations. So that was the first part of the complexity in helping Duke Energy solve that problem in our trial program that we're doing with them. And then the second part of the problem is that we have to go out and pre-sell the secondary use applications to the grid and utility companies, and so as we've started to do that, not only have we had to convince the grid and utility companies that the primary applications of the battery make sense, but now the secondary applications. So you can imagine. So we're pretty far advanced in that, and as I said before, we will have some pilot programs where we will be looking at ways to take that battery from the automobile and plug it into the grid for load balancing, peak shaving, wind and solar energy storage applications, which could be a market that could be 2, 3, 4 times bigger than automotive. So having the utility company would want to participate in being able to buy discounted batteries, just given the aggregate demand there. So that's a long-winded way of saying it's a very complex and difficult equation that's going to take some period of time to solve. But if we get it right, and we can get the battery on a lease and be able to provide Volvo with what we believe is the best quality battery in the world at the best price, Volvo hopefully will win the war in terms of being the largest electric vehicle company in the world. So those are the sorts of things that I think we're dealing with.
Understood. I'm curious as to whether or not this is a short-term effect, or would you expect, when you have a sufficient supply of used Volts, Leafs, C30s, et cetera, out there, that their residuals would be different based on the fact they still have 80% of their battery pack left? Do you need to do that to the consumer and introduce yet another unfamiliarity in the way they buy cars?
Again, I understand the nature of the question, and with respect, I think the consumer needs to start looking at the car as a mobility device and not a car. The consumer has, let's say, an affinity. You buy a car not just because it's cheap, or you buy the car because of the way it looks and feels and drives, but the consumer need not worry about the way you power that car in terms of the battery. We can take care of that for you. What I'm saying is, I think the consumer can look at the car the way they do their cell phone. If we're going to partner with, let's say, a Duke and be your AT&T mobility provider, what's the only choice you have to make when you walk into the cell phone store? Whether you want the iPhone or whether you want the BlackBerry, right? Do you want the Volvo or do you want the Leaf? We'll take care of the mobility for you. And I think that's let's say, the important distinction I'm trying to make is we're actually making the purchase of that car a heck of a lot easier and not a heck of a lot more complicated. Because then if we can take that next step and bundle the electrons into the pricing program of the lease, all the minutes you can drive, you can talk all the minutes, you can drive all the miles you want per month. It's free because it's built into your monthly lease cost. That would be the last phase of the riddle that is going to take some time to, let's say, figure out in terms of getting the utilities to be able to price the cost of electrons in. But that's, it's taken the cell phone companies some time to get to 100% penetration here in the US, 200% penetration in Scandinavia, and I think it's going to take some time to get that model rolled out. But that has to be, from my perspective, the right answer.
So thank you very much for your questions. Mr. Jacoby, any final remarks?
Well, thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting morning with different aspects from government institutions, from us as a car manufacturer, but also from one of very experienced battery suppliers. And I appreciate your participants and your questions. And thank you for coming for this event. And Jeff, thank you very much for moderating.
Thank you.